Hello, I'm Kurt Lidke, Executive Director of Klamath Film, and you just watched The Traveler, a thriller with a very unique twist. With us is the film's director, Martin Hillegas. Hey, Marty, thank you for joining us again. Good to see you, sir, as always.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you have one other film also in the festival this year, Matterhorn, which was shot here in Klamath Falls. So where did you film The Traveler?
We filmed The Traveler in and around the Ashland area,
Okay.
so it's also a local Southern Oregon production.
And where did the concept for this film come from?
It came from wanting to do something with a backpacker, something about isolation with a backpacker, and I started there as far as the inception of the idea, and I just started to think, what's the most interesting thing that could happen to this guy by himself out in the woods? And they're up in Ashland. There's a hiking trail where that cave is, and I've always been really obsessed with that cave. And so I kind of had all the pieces, and I had an old suit from my grandfather, and I just started kind of connecting the dots until I had something I liked, and that was kind of how it happened.
Cool. Well, this film is an interesting example of telling a whole story with no dialogue, aside from, through the phone itself. There's, of course, an old adage in filmmaking that if you can show it, don't say it. So many people get caught up in too much, backstory and context and dialogue. But was that an intentional focus to try to make a film where a character goes through a major story arc without saying a word?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I thought it would be a fun challenge to do a whole film without dialogue. And the whole idea here is that it's this parallel between modern and somebody, a time traveler. And so whether that's the color or the aspect ratio or the grain, I also kind of wanted to meet in the middle with, like, it's kind of a silent film. I don't love that term because that obviously this is anything but silent. There just isn't dialogue, but to kind of meet in the middle where, like, there's a lot of sound but no dialogue, sort of was in the vein of meeting in the middle on time periods with everything.
That's interesting. Well, the first time I watched it, I didn't pick up on the time travel thought. I thought that the bag, which is a pretty great MacGuffin kind of like the suitcase in Pulp Fiction, where you never quite know what exactly it is and what's going on. The intended backstory of this mysterious person, whatnot. I thought maybe it was like a path to another dimension or something like that, or
Mhm.
um, but no, that makes more sense now that it would be a time travel because the clothing was distinct and different, and that the setting was unique. So, um, what was the intended backstory of the mysterious person, or do you want to keep that mysterious?
No, that's okay. Basically, they're also sort of paralleled in that they're both drifters, and this was sort of an misunderstood man in 1911 who is also out in the same area just in 1911, and he has created this or found this portal that he has allocated to his suitcase, and so he is sort of in the process. It's almost like this movie could be the prologue to a feature where now we follow the time traveler as he lives in the,
Mhm.
just sort of this idea of parallel connecting of characters.
It
This quarter.
definitely can leave things a little open-ended as far
Yeah.
as you could delve into, well, with the girlfriend slash ex-girlfriend, what is her story arc? Does she, you know, is there a campaign to try to find the guy? And so, yeah, there's a
Hmm.
lot of directions that you could take it in. What I found interesting about this film, being a filmmaker myself, I know the complexities of being behind the camera and trying to make it all work. This film was almost exclusively shot either twilight or at night. And that can be incredibly complex to pull off correctly with lighting and making sure that you're still getting your color spectrum when you've got almost no light to work with. How difficult was it to film this?
You know, Not super difficult. Taylor Humphrey was the cinematographer on the project, and we, again, a very small crew, me, Taylor, and Josh, the lead. And we've been working together for a long time now, and so we have a pretty good rapport as far as, our filmmaking grammar. And, I would say we just had to be smart about scheduling it over. I think we shot it in 4 or 5 days because of that, even though, page-wise, we weren't covering very much. We needed to shoot 2-3 days for all the night stuff. And then we had to just be smart about when we timed what we shot. So stuff like in the tent could be pitch black, but we needed to shoot stuff before the tent right at twilight. So it's like picking and choosing your hours for story, really.
Yeah, it's interesting because most filmmakers, oftentimes you'll sit around and wait for the golden hour time gap, and this is a film that completely ignores golden hour, but you're targeting twilight after the golden hour ends, and then you get that brief moment that that there's still a little bit of light, and so you're targeting the lower layer that most people are like, well, crap, we can't film now.
Right.
So having a small crew, and I know this is kind of your style, but I don't want to say that anyone typecast themselves, but it was interesting that some of our judges, as soon as they started watching this, were like, "Oh, this is a Marty film," because they just knew immediately, like, "Oh, this is the guy who's made a few other things." Because of course, you've had films in our festival previously. You also had 2 films in our festival last year. So, do you attract yourself to a particular style? Because with this and the other film that you have in this festival, Matterhorn, there's some parallels as far as thrillers. And then one of the films that you shot last year also had kind of a sort of a pseudo monster movie that had kind of a thriller style. Are you just naturally attracted to kind of horror or kind of like dark thriller vibe in terms of a film that you love? Or
Yes, I definitely am, but it's also sort of I think a result of just where I'm at and what I have access to right now, and especially with the pandemic, trying to do things as small as possible, in as isolated locations as possible. It just lends itself really well to that genre, and I do love that genre, but I think it's something that creates a space that you can work in extremely well with a limited crew and a limited cast. And so it's just sort of like, if you try to do something else, your ceiling can kind of be low. And when you work in this space, I guess I feel like I have more room to explore as opposed to if I was trying to do something else. But that's a great compliment to have known that it was mine. That means a lot.
well, it is also a type of film that you can do with a very minimal crew, which is very advantageous for this day and age when we all know how difficult it is to make a film anyway, much less with added restrictions during a global pandemic. So, how have you managed to stay busy amidst all, especially since you're now based in Los Angeles, where things have been even stricter than they were in Oregon? Is that perhaps why you've been shooting so much in Oregon?
Definitely one of the reasons. I also, I'm from Oregon and I've lived my whole life there, and I sort of see Los Angeles as a place of work and living, but all my stories still are going to take place in Oregon, I think, at least for the time being, just because that's the space I grew up in, and it's the place that I know and love, and it's the world that I want my characters to inhabit, I think. But the pandemic hit during our last year at school, and so I pretty much just changed my focus to writing. And so I've been keeping busy, just basically as a screenwriter, trying to get to a point where hopefully someday, when the pandemic is almost over, or at least not as big of a deal anymore, I can kind of hit the ground running and have a lot of feature scripts ready to go.
It is interesting to hear how people have coped with trying to work over the past year and a half. We got quite a few pandemic related films, films that incorporated Zoom a lot, and a lot of animation, because obviously that's the one thing people can work on from home. So
Right.
but it was encouraging to see how people in Oregon were not just resigning to the fact that they couldn't make film, but they were trying to change how they make film to make all of it fit. And that was very much so a theme of what we got for this year's festival. And so kudos to you for finding ways to still film, including your other film that's in the festival, Matterhorn. Are there any sort of themes between both films with Matterhorn and The Traveler, or two completely distinct tales? Because there's at least some similars in terms of like the chase aspect of them, I suppose.
Right. There's a lot of differences, but I would say some similarities are a character who is sort of misunderstood and on the brink of a poor decision that he's going to make that's going to lead him into a situation that he didn't plan for and eventually his demise. And so I'd say they're both stories of morality a little bit as far as the protagonist is concerned, and certainly the chase aspect. But both of those chases are a result of a decision,
Mm-hmm. So what do you hope that people take away from watching The Traveler?
It all started as well with the idea that we're going to come into this story after a man has just had a big fight with his girlfriend. And they're sort of in a position where they're saying things that they're going to take back, that they, if they could hear themselves say what they're saying, they would hate themselves for it. And so it was sort of this world that he gets sucked to as just trying to get away from his girlfriend. And by the end, she sort of realized that she shouldn't have said what she said, but little does she know what she said, which was, I wish you didn't exist, because that's how she's feeling, ends up sort of becoming a reality because he happened to come across this suitcase where he time traveled and now no longer exists. And so it was a little bit of, zooming out, sort of the takeaway was to keep your relationships close and to not let a break in the bridge happen, really. And in this way, that break in the bridge ends up being a break in the time warp, if you will.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Martin, for this film and for joining us. The Traveler will be screened on Sunday, September 19th at 5:30 p.m. in our Southern Shorts category at the Ross Ragland Theater, and available on demand all week. Thank you, Marty, for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.